Briar Rose. A long time ago there lived a king and queen who were very, very sad because they had no children. One day when the queen was resting near a spring, a frog crept out of the water and said to her, "You shall have your wish. Within a year you shall have a little girl." What the frog said came true. The queen had a little child who was so beautiful that the king gave a party in her honor. He wished to invite all the wise women in the land, for these wise women could grant fairy gifts to his little child. There were 13 of them, but only 12 were invited, as the king had only 12 golden plates. After the dinner was over, the wise women in turn arose from the table and named their fairy gifts to the little princess. The first gave to her goodness, the second beauty, the third riches, and so on, up to the last. Before the 12th wise woman could speak, in walked the 13th. This woman was in a great rage because she had not been invited. She cried in a loud voice, "When the princess is 15 years old, she shall prick her finger with a spindle and shall fall down dead." At these words everyone turned pale with fright. The 12th wise woman, who had not yet spoken, now came up and said, "I could not stop this woman's evil words. I can only make them less harsh. The king's child shall not die, but a deep sleep shall fall upon her, in which she shall stay 100 years. The little princess was so beautiful, so kind, and so good that no one who knew her could help loving her. As she grew older, the king and queen began to feel very unhappy, for they could not help thinking of what was to happen to their dear little daughter. They ordered all the spindles in the kingdom to be burned. Now, as it happened, on the very day that the princess was 15 years old, the king and queen were away from home. The princess was quite alone in the castle, and she ran about over the palace, looking in at rooms and halls just as her fancy led her. At last she came to an old tower at the top of a winding stair. She saw a little door. In the lock was a rusty key. When she turned it, the door flew open. There, in a small room, sat an old woman with her spindle, spinning flax. "Good morning," said the princess. "Do tell me what that funny thing is that jumps about so." And then she held out her hand to take the spindle. It came about just as the fairy had foretold. The princess pricked her finger with the spindle. At once she fell upon a bed which was near, and lay in a deep sleep as if dead. This sleep came not only upon the princess, but spread over the whole castle. The king and queen, who had just come home, fell asleep, and all their lords and ladies with them. The horses went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the doves on the roof, the flies on the wall. Yes, even the fire that burned in the fireplace grew still and slept. The meat stopped roasting before the fire. The cook in the kitchen was just going to box the ears of the kitchen boy, but her hand dropped and she sank to sleep. Outside the castle the wind was still, and upon the trees not a leaf stirred. In a short time there sprung up around the castle a hedge of thorn bushes. Year by year the hedge grew higher and higher, until at last nothing of the castle could be seen above it, not even the roof, nor the chimneys, nor the flag on the tower. As years went by, the story of the Sleeping Beauty was told all over the kingdom. Many kings' sons came and tried to get through the hedge of thorns, but this they could not do. The sharp thorns seemed to have hands which held the young men fast. After many, many years, a prince came from a far-off kingdom. He heard the story of the castle and its sleeping beauty. He knew what danger lay in the great hedge of thorn bushes, but the young prince was brave, and he was not to be turned back. "I am not afraid. I will go out and see this beautiful briar rose," he said. It happened that the 100 years of the magic spell had just ended. The day had come when the sleeping princess was to wake up again. As the prince came to the hedge of thorn bushes, it was in full bloom and covered with beautiful red flowers. There, through the thorn bushes, lay a wide road. Soon the prince came to the gates of the castle. He found the horses and dogs lying asleep on the ground. The doves sat on the roof with their heads under their wings. He went into the castle. Even the flies on the wall still slept. Near the throne lay the king and queen, while all around were the sleeping lords and ladies. The whole castle was so still that he could hear his heart beat. The prince went on from room to room until he came to the old tower. Going up the winding stair, he saw the little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and the door was half open. There before him lay the sleeping princess. The prince bent down and gave her a kiss. As he did so, the sleeping beauty opened her eyes. With her the whole castle awoke. The king waked up, and the queen, and all the lords and ladies. The horses in the stable stood up and shook themselves. The dogs jumped about and wagged their tails. The doves on the roof lifted their heads and flew into the fields. The flies on the wall began to buzz. The fire in the kitchen began to burn. The meat began to roast. The cook boxed the ears of the kitchen boy so that he ran off crying. The hedge of thorn bushes around the castle dried up and blew away. Then the prince married the beautiful princess, and they lived happily ever after. Mother Frost. At the edge of a wood there was a great, clear, bubbling spring of cold water. Near this spring lived a widow and her 2 daughters. One of them was very beautiful and a great help about the house, while the other was ugly and idle. The mother loved only the ugly one, for she was her own child. She cared so little for the other daughter that she made her do all the hard work. Every day the poor girl would sit beside the spring and spin until her fingers bled. One day, while she was washing the blood from her hands, the spindle fell into the spring and sank to the bottom. With tears in her eyes, she ran and told her stepmother what she had done. The stepmother was angry and said, "You let the spindle fall into the spring. Now you must go and get it out." The maiden went back to the spring to look for the spindle. She leaned so far over the edge that her hand slipped, and down she sank to the very bottom. All at once she found that she was in a beautiful field where many wild flowers grew. As she walked across the field, she came to a baker's oven full of new bread. The loaves cried to her, "Oh, pull us out, or we shall burn." "Indeed I will," cried the maiden. Stepping up, she pulled all the sweet brown loaves out of the oven. As she walked along, she came to a tree full of apples. The tree cried, shake me, my apples are all quite ripe." "Indeed I will," cried the maiden. So she shook the tree again and again until there was not an apple left on its branches. Then she picked up the apples one by one and piled them in a great heap. When she had picked up all the apples, she walked on. At last she came to a small house. In the doorway sat an old woman who had such large teeth that the girl felt afraid of her and turned to run away. Then the old woman cried, "What do you fear, my child? Come in and live here with me. If you do the work about the house, I will be very kind to you. Only take care to make my bed well. You must shake it and pound it so that the feathers will fly about. Then the children down on the earth will say that snowflakes are falling, for I am Mother Frost." The old woman spoke so kindly that she won the maiden's heart. "I will gladly work for you," she said. The girl did her work well, and each day she shook up the bed until the feathers flew about like snowflakes. She was very happy with Mother Frost, who never spoke an angry word. After the girl had stayed a long time with the kind old woman, she began to feel homesick. She could not help it, though her life with Mother Frost had been so happy. At length she said, "Dear Mother Frost, you have been very kind to me, but I should like to go home to my friends." "I am pleased to hear you say that you wish to go home," said Mother Frost. "You have worked for me so well that I will show you the way myself." She took the maiden by the hand and led her to a broad gateway. The gate was open, and as she went through, a shower of gold fell over the maiden. It clung to her clothes so that she was dressed in gold from her head to her feet. "That is your pay for having worked so hard," said the old woman. "And here is your spindle that fell into the spring." Then the gate was closed, and the maiden found herself once more in the world. She was not far from her own home, and as she came into the farmyard, a cock on the roof cried loudly, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, our golden lady has come home too." When the stepmother saw the girl with her golden dress, she was kind to her. Then the maiden told how the gold had fallen upon her. The mother could hardly wait to have her own child try her luck in the same way. This time she made the idle daughter go to the spring and spin. The lazy girl did not spin fast enough to make her fingers bleed, so she pricked her finger with a thorn until a few drops of blood stained the spindle. At once she let it drop into the water, and sprang in after it herself. The ugly girl found herself in a beautiful field, just as her sister had. She walked along the same path until she came to the baker's oven. She heard the loaves cry, pull us out, or we shall burn." But the lazy girl said to the brown loaves, "I will not. I do not want to soil my hands in your dirty oven." Then she walked on until she came to the apple tree. Shake me, it cried, "for my apples are quite ripe." "I will not," said the girl, "for some of your apples might fall on my head." As she spoke, she walked lazily on. At last the girl stood before the door of Mother Frost's house. She had no fear of Mother Frost's great teeth, but walked right up to the old woman and offered to be her servant. For a whole day the girl was very busy and did everything that she was told to do. On the second day she began to be lazy, and on the third day she was still worse. She would not get up in the morning. The bed was never made or shaken so the feathers could fly about. At last Mother Frost grew tired of her and told her that she must go away. This was what the lazy girl wanted, for she felt sure that now she would have the golden shower. Mother Frost led her to the great gate, but as she passed under it, a kettle full of black pitch was upset over her. "This is what you get for your work," said the old woman as she shut the gate. The idle girl walked home covered with pitch. When she went into the farmyard, the cock on the roof cried out, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, our sticky lady has come home too." The pitch stuck so fast to the girl that, as long as she lived, it never came off. Rumpelstiltskin. Once upon a time there lived a miller who had a beautiful daughter. Now the miller had to visit the king's castle, and while there he happened to meet the king face to face. The king stopped and spoke to the miller. The miller, wishing the king to think that he was very rich, told him that he had a daughter who could spin straw into gold. "Ah," said the king, "that is indeed a wonderful gift. Tomorrow you must bring your daughter to my castle, that she may spin some gold for me." Then the miller was afraid and wished he had not spoken, but he had to do as the king ordered. The next day he brought his daughter to the castle. Now it happened that the king loved gold above all things. So taking the poor girl by the hand, he led her into one of the great rooms of the castle. There in the middle of the room stood a spinning wheel, and near it was a great heap of straw. The king turned to the miller's daughter and said, "There is your spinning wheel, and here is the straw. If you do not spin all of it into gold by morning, your head shall be cut off." Then the king left the room and locked the door behind him. The poor girl could only sit and weep, for she had not the least idea how to spin straw into gold. While she was crying, the door flew open, and a little old man stepped into the room. He had bandy legs, a long red nose, and wore a tall peaked cap. Bowing low to the maiden, he said, "Good evening, my dear young lady. Why are you crying?" "Alas," said the girl, "the king has ordered me to spin all this straw into gold, and I do not know how." Then the little man said, "What will you give me if I will spin it for you?" "This string of gold beads from my neck," said the girl. The little man took the beads, and sitting down began to spin. Whir, whir went the wheel, round and round it whirled. Lo, as the maiden looked, she saw the coarse straw turn into beautiful golden threads. The little man kept so busily at work that soon all the straw was gone, and in its place lay a heap of the finest gold. The next morning the king unlocked the door. How his eyes sparkled at the sight of the gold! These riches made the king even more greedy than before. He led the maiden to a still larger chamber, which was full of straw. Turning to the trembling girl, he said, "There is your spinning wheel, and here is the straw. If you do not spin all of it into gold by morning, your head shall be cut off." The maiden's eyes filled with tears at the sight of that huge heap of straw. Sitting down, she began to cry. All at once the door opened, and in jumped the little old man. He took off his pointed cap and said to the miller's daughter, "What will you give me if I help you again and spin this straw into gold?" "This ring from my finger," said the maiden. The little man took the ring, and seating himself before the spinning wheel, began to spin. Whir, whir went the wheel. Faster and faster it whirled. In the morning the straw had all been turned into finest gold. When the king opened the door, how his eyes glistened at the sight of the gold! Still, it only made him greedy for more, so taking the poor girl by the hand, he led her to a much larger chamber. This was so full of straw that there was hardly room for her to sit at the spinning wheel. Turning to the maiden, the king said, "This is your spinning wheel, and here is the straw. If you do not spin all of it into gold by morning, your head shall be cut off. But if you do spin the gold, I will marry you and make you my queen." "For," thought the king, "though she is only a miller's daughter, yet she can make me the richest king in the world." Hardly had the door closed behind the king when the little old man came hopping and skipping into the room. Taking off his pointed cap, he said to the girl, "What will you give me if I will again spin this straw for you?" "Ah," said the maiden, "I have nothing more to give." "Then you must make me a promise," said the little man. "You must promise to give me your first child after you have become queen." The poor girl saw no other way to save her life, so she gave her promise to the little man. Then he sat down and began to spin. Whir, whir went the wheel. Faster and faster he spun. Soon the great room full of straw was all turned into gold. When the king opened the door the next morning, he saw the maiden sitting beside a large heap of shining gold. The king kept his promise and made the poor miller's daughter his queen. About a year later, the queen had a lovely child, but she forgot all about her promise. One day the little old man came hopping into the queen's room and said, "Now give me what you have promised." The queen was filled with terror, and offered the little man all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her the child. "No, I do not care for riches. You must keep your promise." Then the queen began to mourn and to weep, until the little man had pity for her. "I will give you 3 days," he said, "and if in that time you can guess my name, you shall keep the child." The queen lay awake that night, thinking of all the names she had ever heard. In the morning, men were sent to every part of the kingdom to find strange names. The next day the little man came again. The queen began to call off to him all the names she had found, Caspar, Melchior, and many, many others. At each one the little man shook his head and said, "No, that is not my name." Then the queen had her men go from house to house through the town. They took down the name of every man, woman, and child. When the little man came again, the queen had a long list of names to give him. "Is your name Cow-ribs, or Sheep-shanks, or Bandy-legs?" she said to him at last. He answered to each one, "No, that is not my name." On the 3rd day the queen's men began to come back from all parts of the kingdom. They had been far and wide to find new names. One of these men said, "I could not find any new names, but going by some deep woods, I heard a fox wish good night to a rabbit. Soon I came upon a little house, in front of which a fire was burning. Around this fire danced a little man. He wore a pointed cap and had a long nose and bandy legs. As he went hopping and jumping about, first on one leg and then on the other, he sang, 'My baking and brewing I will do today, the queen's son tomorrow I will take away. No wise man can show the queen where to begin, for my name, to be sure, is Rumpelstiltskin.'" The queen clapped her hands for joy. She knew that at last she had found the name. She sent the servant away with a bag of gold and waited for the queer little man to come to her. At sunset, the little fellow came hopping and skipping up to the queen. "Now, O queen," he said, "this is your last chance. Tell me my name." The queen asked, "Is your name Conrad?" "No." "Henry?" "No." "Then your name is Rumpelstiltskin." "The fairies have told you," shouted the little man, dancing about. He became so angry that in his rage he stamped his right foot into the ground. This made him more angry still, and taking hold of his left foot with both hands, he pulled so hard that he tore himself quite in two. The Wolf and the 7 Young Kids. There was once an old goat who had 7 little kids. She loved them all as much as any mother ever loved her children. One day the old goat wished to go into the woods to get food for her kids. Before she started, she called them all to her and said, "Dear children, I am going into the woods. Now do not open the door while I am away. If the old wolf should get into our hut, he would eat you all up, and not a hair would be left. You can easily tell him by his rough voice and his black feet." "Dear mother," cried all the young kids, "we will be very careful not to let the old wolf in. You need not think of us at all, for we shall be quite safe." So the old goat went on her way into the dark woods. She had not been gone long when there came a loud rap at the door, and a voice cried, "Open the door, my dear children. I have something here for each of you." But the young kids knew by the rough voice that this was the old wolf. So one of them said, "We shall not open the door. Our mother's voice is soft and gentle. Your voice is rough. You are a wolf." The old wolf ran away to a shop where he ate a piece of white chalk to make his voice soft. Then he went back to the goat's hut and rapped at the door. He spoke in a soft voice and said, "Open the door for me, my dear children. I am your mother." But the oldest little goat thought of what his mother had said. "If you are our mother, put your foot on the window sill that we may see it." When the wolf had done this, all the little goats cried out, "No, you are not our mother. We shall not open the door. Our mother's feet are white, and yours are black. Go away, you are the wolf." Then the wolf went to the miller's and said to him, "Mr. Miller, put some flour on my foot, for I have hurt it." The miller was so afraid of the wolf that he did as he was told. Then the wicked wolf went to the goat's house again and said, "Open the door, dear children, for I am your mother." "Show us your foot," said the little kids. So the wolf put his one white foot on the window sill. When the little kids saw that it was white, they thought this was really their mother, and they opened the door. In jumped the ugly old wolf, and all the little kids ran to hide themselves. The first hid under the table, the second in the bed, the third in the oven, the fourth in the kitchen, the fifth in the cupboard, the sixth under the wash-tub, and the seventh, who was the smallest of all, in the tall clock. The wolf quickly found and gobbled up all but the youngest, who was in the clock. Then the wolf, who felt sleepy, went out and lay down on the green grass. Soon he was fast asleep. Not long after this the old goat came home from the woods. Oh, what did she see! The house door was wide open, the tables and chairs were upset, the wash-tub was broken in pieces, and the bed was tipped over. "Where are my dear children?" cried the poor goat. At last she heard a little voice crying, "Dear mother, here I am in the tall clock." The old goat helped the little goat out. Soon she learned how the wolf had eaten her dear children. Then she went out of the hut, and there on the grass lay the wolf, sound asleep. As the goat looked at the wicked old wolf, she thought she saw something jumping about inside him. "Ah," she said, "it may be that my poor children are still alive." So she sent the little kid into the house for a pair of scissors and a needle and some thread. She quickly cut a hole in the side of the wicked old wolf. At the first snip of the scissors, one of the kids stuck out his head. As the old goat cut, more and more heads popped out. At last all 6 of the kids jumped out upon the grass. They went hopping and skipping about their mother. Then the old goat said to them, "Go and bring me some large stones from the brook." The 7 little kids ran off to the brook and soon came back with 7 large stones. They put these stones inside the wicked old wolf. The old goat sewed up the wolf's side so gently and quietly that he did not wake up nor move. When at last the wicked wolf did wake up, the great stones inside him made him feel very heavy. He was thirsty, too, so he walked down to the brook to drink. The stones were so heavy that they tipped him over the edge of the bank into the deep water, and he was drowned. The Shoemaker and the Elves. A shoemaker and his wife lived in a little house on the edge of a wood. They were very, very poor, and each day they grew poorer and poorer. At last there was nothing left in the house but leather for 1 pair of shoes. "I will cut out this last pair of shoes," the shoemaker said to his wife. "Tomorrow I will sew them and peg them." So he cut out the leather and left it on his bench. The next morning he went into his shop to make the shoes. What did he see? A pair of shoes all nicely made and ready to be sold. The stitches were so fine and the shoes so well made that they were quickly sold. With the money, the poor shoemaker bought leather for 2 pairs of shoes. Then he said to his wife, "I will cut out the leather for 2 pairs of shoes. Tomorrow I will sew them and peg them." So he cut out the leather for the shoes and left it on his bench. The next morning, when he went into his shop to make the shoes, what did he find? Yes, there were 2 pairs of shoes already made. The work was so well done that those shoes were also sold very quickly. With the money, the poor shoemaker bought enough leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Those he also cut out and left upon his bench. The next morning he found 4 pairs of beautiful shoes, all well made. And so it went on and on. Instead of being a very poor shoemaker, he became a very rich shoemaker. His shoes were so well made that even the Queen herself wore them. At last the shoemaker said to his wife, "We must find out who makes the shoes." So one bright moonlight night they hid behind a curtain, where they could watch the bench and not be seen. Just on the stroke of midnight, 2 little elves jumped through the window. They went skipping and dancing up to the bench. Sitting cross-legged, they took up the leather and began to work. How their needles flew back and forth, back and forth. How their little hammers beat, rap-a-tap-tap, rap-a-tap-tap. Almost before the shoemaker and his wife could think, the work was all done. The tiny elves ran about, skipping and dancing, skipping and dancing. Then whisk, quick as a wink, they were gone. The next morning the good shoemaker said to his wife, "What can we do for those dear little elves?" "I should like very much to make some clothes for them," said his wife. "They were almost naked." "If you will make their coats, I will make them some shoes," said the shoemaker. Their little feet were bare. When the clothes and shoes were ready, they were put upon the bench. The shoemaker and his wife again hid behind the curtain. Just as before, when the clock struck 12, in jumped the tiny elves. They went skipping and dancing to their work. They saw the little coats, the tiny stockings, and the neat little shoes. They clapped their hands for joy. Then, slipping on their clothes, they skipped hand in hand out of the window. The shoemaker and his wife never saw the little elves again, but after that night, good luck seemed always to be with them. End of Chapter 1. Recording by Evan Smith.